Crypto isn't escaping banks, it's literally being rebuilt by them. Donald Trump, he just passed the so-called Genius Act that is marketed as anti-CBDC and pro-stablecoin. But in reality, it's just a Trojan horse that allows for the shadow banking world to take over the blockchain. And in the next few minutes, we're going to break down why stablecoins and crypto in general are just a continuation of the old Eurodollar, the same system that controls your country's money, and why the likes of Larry Fink, Donald Trump, and the biggest banks in the world are all pushing for this crypto mass adoption. Without further ado, let's dive in. I'm standing behind the former headquarters of the Moscow Narodny Bank in London, supposedly the birthplace of the Eurodollar system. It's also where we're hosting our live event on August 29, so if you're nearby, you can get the tickets in the description down below. But coming back to the topic, during the Cold War, the Soviets, they feared that the Americans, they would freeze those dollar deposits they had, so they moved them all over here to London. What's crazy though is that during that transfer, no physical dollars actually crossed the ocean. It was all purely a ledger entry, a promise that the dollars were stashed somewhere, and the banks, they would record it on the balance sheets, very similar to how a blockchain transaction works. Now, the banks quickly realized the devil's trick, that you don't actually need those physical dollars at any point. You just need a promise that you can get them sometime in the future. So one bank gives out a claim, the other bank accepts that claim as if it were money. It's basically a massive accounting book where promises, not physical dollars, are traded, swapped, and transferred. Imagine if you could walk into your bank office with a paper that you signed yourself, claiming that you have £1 million stashed somewhere, and then you try taking out a loan against it. Don't worry, guys, I have the money somewhere. The bank would call you retarded and throw you out of the office. But that's exactly what banks do. They take out loans against these claims, another bank accepts it, and then it can use it as collateral for another loan. Rinse and repeat, and trillions of dollars are created out of thin air with no regulation whatsoever, no reserves required. And this shadow banking system has built up entire nations like China. It has enslaved economically continents like South America, and it caused one of the most catastrophic recessions to date, all because of a bunch of degenerate gambling banksters. In 2008, the whole system nearly collapsed. The world had been getting a cocaine hit of cheap dollar loans, Eurodollars, and they were all chasing that higher yield. The problem, the collateral that they posted was garbage. Remember those dogshit mortgage-backed securities that were labeled as safe? Well, once people stopped trusting it, lenders stopped accepting it. And since everybody was leveraged to the hilt, the scramble was to avoid margin calls. Now, if you've ever done leverage trading, you know that rule number one is the lender shouldn't be able to seize your assets. So when Lehman almost collapsed, everybody was on the hunt for pristine collateral, which is basically assets that people would accept even when the world around them is burning. The gold standard for that would be Treasuries. In the crypto world, that would be Bitcoin. In fact, a very similar situation happened 3 years ago with FTX. Sam Bankman-Fried was pretty much making his monopoly money, the FTT tokens, and then using it as a base to take out these billion-dollar loans. And with that money, he was buying businesses, making risky trades and investments. And all is great as long as the token doesn't lose its value. And since it did, well, guess what? All those banks and businesses, they were calling in their loans, or they wanted better assets in return, such as Bitcoin. Since Sammy couldn't deliver, FTX had collapsed in less than 48 hours, all because of rotten collateral. Soon after the global financial crisis, in 2009, Bitcoin magically appears, and it is promoted as the people's coin. You know, unbank yourself, kick out Wall Street, freedom money. But over the past decade and a half, it has done anything but that. As Roger Ver pointed out in his book, it was probably hijacked by some state actors or banks because it conveniently solves two of the main issues that Wall Street had in 2008. First, pristine collateral. With a hard cap of 21 million coins, Bitcoin is the perfect collateral and store of value. I'll actually break that myth of just 21 million coins by the end of this video. But secondly, the technology that it is built on, aka the blockchain, it's just the updated and better version of the existing Eurodollar ledger. And now, because all the wallets are public, you can see the shaky books of all these companies and banks before the crisis and hopefully catch that falling knife by swapping out the toxic assets and saving your business. To prove my point, everybody celebrated Bukele for making Bitcoin the legal tender of El Salvador, for going to war against the US dollar and banks. But ask yourself the question, if he really is a threat of the United States, then why is he still going there? More importantly, why is he still alive? Why hasn't he been JFK'd? Because it was never about freedom, and everything to do with collateral. You see, 3 months before his 2021 Bitcoin Miami conference announcement, Bukele was in Washington begging IMF for a $1 billion bailout. The country ran out of dollars to pay out its loans, which is crazy because its currency is literally the dollar. The IMF said no, you guys are too corrupt, too mismanaged, so Bukele, he had to become creative. And he took the playbook from the Eurodollar system by using Bitcoin as collateral for those dollarized loans. It was never about being orange-pilled, it was all about using Bitcoin as a pawn. Because fast forward to this year, and guess what? Their experiment has ended. They secured the IMF loan, but one of those conditions is for them to phase out Bitcoin, and all of a sudden you get to see the picture in full action. El Salvador was never orange-pilled. Bitcoin was a temporary fix to the Eurodollar shortage. Matthew 7:15 says it best, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." And Donald Trump's Genius Act, the US's stamp of approval on stablecoins, has nothing to do with pumping your bags, nothing to do with increasing crypto adoption. It's all about giving these companies the license to play in the Eurodollar casino. How so? Well, even though they have to buy treasuries in order to issue those stablecoins, nobody said those T-bills have to stay idle. They can be double-dipped or used as collateral to take out even more loans. And that's called rehypothecation, the banksters' old trick where they use one real thing in order to make 10 paper promises out of it. And if it sounds familiar, that's because that's exactly what caused the 2008 global financial crisis. Now, this is where the wolf starts showing its teeth, because all these stablecoins, they are the perfect Trojan horse for the CBDC. Not through some Fed coin or some government CBDC. No. Through innovation and the free market economy. And do not worry, both Circle and Tether are able to freeze your coins today. Just look at their terms of service. Of course, those terms being written by Washington. Secondly, the blockchain solves one of the biggest pain points for banks from 2008, which I call the collateral music chairs. Basically, by the time everybody found out that the mortgage paper was actually toxic, it was far too late to offload it to the greater fool and grab a chair. That's why banks had major losses, but with blockchain, cryptos, and stablecoins in general, it makes it far easier to see who's swimming naked, who is broke, who is holding those toxic assets on their balance sheets. But as we saw with the FTX scandal, in practice, all it really does is it allows the insiders to dump that rotten collateral before the music stops. And on a broader spectrum, this is why the Eurodollar system constantly needs new assets to take out loans against. Because you can only leverage one treasury to a point until it gets too risky and absurd. That's why wars keep happening. It's one of the easiest ways to steal physical collateral, such as gold, oil, or natural resources. And the other way to keep this game alive is to invent new synthetic collateral. Basically, you're trading things that you don't actually own. Paper assets, IOUs, ETFs, futures derivative contracts. That's why Larry Fink is drooling over the Bitcoin ETFs and why Wall Street is embracing these crypto derivatives. And by the way, experts, they have pointed out that you can make theoretically more than 21 million Bitcoin, not the actual thing, but paper versions of it, claims on it, such as the IOUs and derivatives that all these exchanges are trading, not actually trading the Bitcoin itself. Doesn't it remind you of the rehypothecation that banks do? That is why, even though you have all these inflows coming in, the Bitcoin price is more or less staying the same. So what's the actual solution? Own the collateral. We've been trained by the system to buy these promises and treat them like the real thing. You buy tokenized gold instead of gold bars because it is lighter. You rent a property instead of actually owning it because of all the hassle. And you trade your crypto on a centralized exchange because of the convenience. Don't trade your asset for someone else's number on a ledger book. Own the thing that cannot be tampered with. And then you can use those cryptos and loan them out into the real world. I'm not talking about some cross margin on Binance, not some IOU on a centralized book. You want to bridge your crypto assets by buying property, by buying businesses, things that you actually have the title deed of, and it's not controlled by some exchange's terms of service. Now, many of you will say, but this is exactly what the banks and elites do, and that is correct. You can live your life on principles, but if you want to stack and actually improve your wealth, you have to copy the playbook from the rich, which is stacking assets and using their money twice. And that can only be done through debt and leverage. And if you're concerned about the debt bubble bursting, well, I'll tell you that a riot or some complete chaos is going to be the first thing on your mind. Anyway, we have the event on August 29 here in London. You can book the tickets down there. We hope to see you there as well if you're nearby. That's it for today's video. I'll be seeing you next time. And until then, bye-bye.